Someone You Should Know. A program about people you know, and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, welcome to another edition of Someone You Should Know. Glad to have you with us. It's Wednesday. It's 10 a.m. And we're ready to rock and roll today because we're going to have a great discussion with a gentleman who has had an amazing career in the military, and he's a really nice guy too. We are brought to you this week by our good friend Irving Chung, who is an expert at all things having to do with franchises. You can reach out. His phone number, his email is on the screen right now. You can reach out for a free consultation with Irving. He knows what he's talking about. If you've been thinking about franchising, either now or later in life, now would be a good time to have a brief conversation with him to find out what it's all about. Franchising could be something in your future. Talk to Irving. He's a really nice guy, and he'll give you all the information, and he knows what he's talking about because he's also a franchisee. Well, I mentioned that my guest is a military veteran of the Air Force with a career. The more I read about my guest today, the more my jaw just dropped. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time building up the intro. I'm just going to invite Rick Francona on the show to be with us. Rick, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Stu.
And I will set this up just briefly because for those that are thinking, wait a minute, that name Francona sounds a little familiar. Going back several weeks, I had Rick's wife, Emily, on the program, and she was talking about her involvement with the adoptive village in Guatemala, and she had a fascinating story to tell. And I realized when I first met Emily and found out about Rick, I was going to have them both on the same show. There was no way on earth that I could have both of them on the same show, because each one of them has had such a broad career that I had to have them separately. So I welcome you, Rick, and you are a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and I thank you for your service. You are a veteran of Vietnam. What years were you in country in Vietnam?
1972. I was at the latter end, so I'm in the younger group of the old Vietnam vets. Right. I got in just before it ended. It was a great experience. I'm glad, not glad that I was in a war, but I was glad that I gained that experience because that initial tour set me up for the rest of my career. Because you learn a lot when you're in a combat zone, when you're surrounded by people that really know what they're doing. So I don't regret the service at all.
And I'm a Vietnam veteran myself. I was there in 69 and 70. I was an Army ordnance officer. So I know that area. And you made a career out of the Air Force. And you certainly have had a much broader career than I could ever have dreamed of. You were an intelligence officer. Was that most of your career, or what happened when you first went into the Air Force?
Well, virtually all of it was in the intelligence community, whether you were in, the education and training side, the operations side, the management side. Virtually my entire 28 years was dedicated to that. I joined the Air Force in 1970. Vietnam was in full swing. They had the lottery. I figured it was only a matter of time before my number came up. I was in college, wasn't finding myself, if you will. And I said, maybe I should join the service. And I went and talked to each of the services, saw what they had to offer. And, the Air Force really kind of appealed to me. They offered me a lot of technical training, which I was looking at. And I thought, if I don't go back to college, I want a skill that I can sell, and electronics, something like that. So that's what I was hoping to do. When I got down to basic training, of course, they give you that battery of tests to find out what you're good at, because the Air Force, and I'm sure the Army was the same way, doesn't really care what you want. They're more interested in what they need. So
Right.
they gave me a language aptitude test to see if I had an ability to learn foreign languages. Surprisingly, I scored well on it, and they offered me a career, a job as a linguist. And at that time, of course, Vietnam was the game in town. And they said, if you sign up for this, you're probably going to learn Vietnamese. I signed up for it. I learned Vietnamese.
So you, as you said, you got in kind of the tail end of the Vietnam War, when the war finally, wound down. What was your next assignment? Where did you go from there?
Yeah, that was interesting because I knew that as soon as the Paris Accords were signed and it started to wind down, Vietnamese was not going to be a language of the future. I knew that if I was going to stay in the Air Force, I'd have to find something else to do. At that time, they were offering other languages, great incentive packages, cash bonuses, a tax-free because we were in a combat zone. And I said, well, I'm interested in doing this. And of course, back then I was a buck sergeant. And I said, well, what do you have? What kind of languages do you need? And they said, well, if you want to get your tax-free bonus, you're going to have to sign up this month. And we have 3 languages, Arabic, Hebrew, and German. And of the 3, Arabic was the only one that really appealed to me. I'll tell you why. Kind of an aside. When I was 14 years old, my mother gave me a book. It was called With Lawrence in Arabia. And it was a fascinating account of T.E. Lawrence in the Middle East. I read it and I thought, this is very interesting. So I signed up for that. And I went to Arabic language school, which was night and day different than Vietnamese. I mean, Vietnamese is actually a very simple language, easy to learn. Arabic is among the hardest to learn. So I had a steep learning curve, learned Arabic. And then everything I did after that was based on my ability to speak Arabic the rest of my career.
I mean, we certainly had relations with the Middle Eastern countries and all at that time after Vietnam. But was there any hint at that time when you were learning Arabic that there was going to ultimately be a lot more involvement and conflicts, if you will, in the Middle East, and that Arabic was going to be very necessary?
No, there was nothing on the horizon and nothing to make me think there would be. But it was just of an interest to me. I had asked for the training, and I said I would like to be assigned at the embassy in Beirut. And they said, sure, no problem. Of course, there were a lot of things that happened about that time. 1975, we see the civil war in Lebanon. We start to see Americans get more involved, which surprised a lot of people. With the deployment of the Marines to the Beirut airport, we saw how that turned out. But the United States was always very wary of getting involved, especially on the ground in the Middle East. And that lasted up until the late 80s. And then as oil became much more important, as our relationships with the Saudis, the Kuwaitis became much more important, and we lost the Iranians in 79, our whole policy shifted. And all of a sudden, Arabic language capability was catapulted into the forefront. And so from then on, I was always in demand.
And you served as an interpreter for a great deal of that time.
My only real job as an interpreter, and it kind of fell in my lap, was for General Schwarzkopf. And I was surprised because you would think that the commander of the Central Command would have an Arabic interpreter assigned to him. But because of U.S. policies, politics, the U.S. Central Command is headquartered in Florida, not the Middle East. So most of his staff weren't Arabic speakers because Arabic speakers want to be in the Middle East. So he didn't really have anybody on his staff. They deployed to Saudi Arabia, and he said, where's my interpreter? And the director of intelligence, who was an acquaintance of mine, said, he'll be here tomorrow. And so I got a phone call that night, and General Jack Leidy, great guy, he said, Rick, how'd you like to be Schwarzkopf's interpreter? I said, well, sir, I'm here at the Pentagon. I kind of have a good job. He says, it's amusing that you thought that was a question, Major. So off I went, and General Schwarzkopf was a delight to work for as a major. Now, I'm not sure I would have wanted to work for him as a colonel because he could be really tough, demanding. And that was a great tour. And pretty much set me up for the follow-on tours in the rest of my career. Because, once you have that little check mark, you have some cachet in the community.
I mean, it just in the military that almost sounds like falling into a dream job.
Yeah.
To be able to work with a gentleman of his stature, and I know that he was kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He had a very, very pleasing personality at times, but boy, he could get tough.
Yeah, but he could work a room. He knew when he had to be tough. He knew when he had to be charming, and he could be. But I can remember going into some sessions, some meetings with primarily the Saudi generals, and most of all who spoke English. But he still wanted me to converse with them in Arabic because, as out of respect. So sometimes he would say things, and when I would translate them, normally you don't translate into the other language. Normally you translate from that language into English. And I would just shortcut some of the stuff because I was interpreting, not translating. And he'd look at me and says, he said all that in 5 words. I said, yeah. But sometimes he wanted to be gruff, and he says, now I'm going to go in there. I don't want to make sure that they translate this exactly as it's coming out. Because usually their interpreters did the same thing I did. They kind of cleaned it up to keep things civil. But he could be uncivil if he needed to be. But great respect for the man.
And what other countries in the Middle East did you spend time in, and maybe other figures that you've met?
Well, most of my time was, of course, in the intelligence community. So we didn't get to hobnob with a lot of the locals of stature. But I served as the air attaché in Damascus, Syria, for almost 3 years. Probably my most interesting tour. I served with another agency of the U.S. government in Iraq. We'll just let that go. And I was an advisor to the Jordanian army. That was a great tour. And I've served, this term TDY, temporary duty in all of the countries over there, except I've never been to Libya and I've never been to Yemen. 2 places I'd like to go see eventually.
Well, and you spent some time in Egypt and in Germany and in Israel also.
Yeah, a lot of time in Israel. We did a lot of liaisoning with the Israeli services. We have a very close relationship, very solid relationship with the Israelis. Although I was always a little suspect by them because they said, you spent too much time in the Arab world. We're not sure where your loyalties lie. And I said, well, you can trust me. They're not with some of these Arab states. I went into the intelligence community to work the problems, not develop friendships. And I always wanted to be on the adversarial side. That's why when the Desert Storm was over, General Schwarzkopf was very nice, called me into his office and said, you did a great job for me. Where would you like to go? I'll call the Air Force and have them make it happen. I said, I want to be the air attaché in Damascus. He said, you seriously want to go to Syria when you can have any job you want? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay. 6 months later, phone call.
All right. So I'll ask the same question. Why Syria?
I had always been fascinated by the Syrians. And of course, they were on the axis of evil. They were always part of the bad guys. They were a Soviet client state. Then they were a Russian client state. And I knew there were going to be problems there. And I just wanted to be kind of involved in doing something where I was doing something for the United States against what I believed was a problem regime. I still think they're a problem regime, and I'd still like to be doing things about it, rather than on the other side. I mean, I enjoyed my tour being an advisor to the Jordanians, but it was all a friendly thing. So I kind of like adversarial.
You have hobnobbed with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what was that like? I mean, he was like in favor, out of favor, back in favor, and
both. I've been with him at both times, and he can be charming, but he is solely focused on what's best for Israel and how he sees what's best for Israel, and not always in line with U.S. policy or the U.S. leadership, but you got to give the guy credit. He gets things done, and he can be like a bull in a china shop, but you never question where his loyalties are and where he's going, always advancing.
Have you ever been compared to James Bond?
Well, I know my profile photo on Facebook and all that. I'm in a tuxedo with a weapon, but no, I'm just a U.S. intelligence officer. We don't do all that, assassinations and things like that. So
And I thought the same thing when I saw the photo, and all too. But just the fact that like when you said, "Well, I would like an assignment in Syria," it was like, send me where the excitement is, send me
yeah.
where the
Mhm.
danger might lurk, because I'm
Well,
ready for it. Because
and
most people would say, "No, I'll turn that down. I'd rather." Yeah. How about, is there an assignment in Hawaii available?
yeah. And that backfires on you sometime, wanting to be where the action is. So as I mentioned, I served with, and we all know who it is, but I won't say it, but the other agency. And one of the operations I was involved in was extracting a family of a scientist from Baghdad. This guy had defected, and he was willing to cooperate with the United States. He was involved in the Iraqi nuclear program, and we believed him to be the real deal. But he said, "Listen, I can't work with you if my family's still in Baghdad, because they'll be dead tomorrow." So we were assigned the mission of getting his family out of Baghdad, and we did it. And he wrote a book about it. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but if you look up the name Khadir Hamza, you can read all about it. But it was a little too exciting, because while up there, there was an IED attack on our about 90 meters from our team house, and we all got banged up pretty bad. But I'm still here.
I mean, this is stuff that movies are made out of.
Yeah. The movie I want made is a lot less like Fauda, and a lot more like Strategic Air Command.
In fact, just started watching the season 4 of Fauda.
I'm going to do a review on that. Have you watched it all yet?
No, just started watching season 4.
And on the edge of your seat the whole time. I mean, I don't know. That's a really well done show.
Do you find it a little bit easier to follow than most people would, because it's dubbed and all? But you having been in that culture, do you find it a little easier to understand what the flow is, or is it just good acting to you?
I did a review of the other seasons, and I put some explanatory notes, and I said, if you're not a Middle East specialist and you're watching this, they're going to make references to certain organizations and certain nicknames and certain acronyms that you're not going to understand. So here they are, and I listed them all out. So when I watch it, of course, it's in Arabic when they're speaking Arabic, and when they're speaking Hebrew, they dub it into English. So I can understand the Arabic, and it's fascinating to watch the subtitles and how accurate or not they are.
Interesting. Well, your first book, Allied Adversary, that was based on the fall of Iraq.
Yeah, it starts back in 1987 when we started a relationship with the Iraqis, and it was decided that we were going to make contact with the Iraqis. Remember, there was the attack on that USS destroyer in the Gulf, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. So we at the Pentagon decided to open up a liaison channel with the Iraqis, and try and make some sort of relationship so that didn't happen again. So I was on the team, and then ended up being the primary contact with the Iraqis for that. So I spent a lot of time in Baghdad during the Iran-Iraq War when they were trading Scud missiles with each other. I was in Baghdad, and I got to meet a lot of people in the military intelligence service. So I got to work with them and got to know them, and I traveled all over Iraq during the war, watching what was going on. Sort of like an attaché, but we didn't call them attachés then because we didn't really have great relations. Then when they invaded Kuwait, one of the reasons they tasked me to be Schwarzkopf's interpreter was because I knew all these Iraqi generals that we were about to go fight. And I was able to give General Schwarzkopf, I said, well, what do you know about this general? I said, well, he's not really an Arab. He's a Circassian, And here's where he stands and where they stand in Iraqi society. So he's never going to be a threat to Saddam. So Saddam trusts him. So that kind of insight. So I talk all about that in that book. So I start back in '87, and I use the kind of the hook in a book. You know, I said I met a guy, was my good friend. Years later at Safwan, when we were doing the talks with the Iraqis, who shows up as the Iraqi interpreter? My friend. And we meet each other again on the opposite sides of the table this time. Quite an experience.
And that was the first book that you wrote.
Right.
And all the name of the book, and you can go to Rick's website, which is francona.com and francona.net. Both of them, you'll get the information and all. But check out the book for those that love military history and all. You are just going to salivate over this book.
And I'll tell you, Stuart, it's out of print, but you can still find it on the secondary market. You can buy it probably for $1, but whatever, you know. And but it was, I wrote it in '99, so you know it's gone. There's a picture of that is an absolutely great photo of you with General Schwarzkopf. Yeah.
Well, that's what I said. That guy, he could get so intense, but he had $1 million smile.
Yeah. That last picture you just showed there was that's the negotiating tent, not negotiating. Those were the talks tent. We didn't negotiate. We were dictating. And I'm in the red square there at the head of the table, kind of keeping things civil. Pretty tense moments there with the Iraqis.
Did you know at the time when you're sitting at a table with those people, what an important role that you were playing in all of this?
Yes, it was. I knew that, and when I was in Vietnam, I knew that I was playing a small role in a bigger picture. When I went to the Middle East, and I knew my position, sitting at the hand of the commander, I was going to witness very interesting things. And I knew that. So I kept a journal of what was going on because I knew that this was going to be important to somebody someday. And I'm glad I did that. And I always, when I was deployed, I would always write letters to Emily and just kind of recount what I was doing so that later on I would have a record. So that's how, and she helped me write the book because we gathered all this information.
And that's a great segue into the conversation because I wanted to know where and when did you meet Emily? Because she was also in the Air Force.
Yes, she was. She was an intelligence officer and a fine intelligence officer. I was an instructor.
Well, you have to say that.
Yeah, and of course I'll get in trouble for telling people this, but everybody knows I was an instructor at the intelligence school in Denver, Colorado at the time, and Emily came through as a brand new second lieutenant student. And, you're not supposed to do that, but I could not resist this woman.
Yeah, we've all watched Top Gun.
You've talked to her. I mean, you know how she is. So. We hit it off, and then we've been together for 42 years now. So,
she is an immigrant.
Right.
And she told that story on our program together, and so being that she was an intelligence officer, you were an intelligence officer. Was there any friction at home over this? Were there discussions, or were you able to say, "Let's leave work at work and home separately"?
Well, for the most part, but of course, I would say at least half the time we were not stationed together. So a lot of long distance relationships. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad.
Okay.
But we had different specialties. She was a Balkans and Latin American specialist. I was a Middle East specialist. Although she did learn Arabic when we went to Damascus, she went as well. But for the most part, our jobs were so far different that it never really came up. And I was not. I started off in the technical side of the intelligence community. Signals intelligence, monitoring, communications, and electronics. And, she was doing the human part. And then after a while, she says, I agreed to come over to the dark side and I became a case officer myself. And then then we were able to work together a lot of things. But no, that give and take, we're still doing
that. So that's a good thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, you spent more than 27 years in
20, almost 28 years. Yeah.
And how long was Emily in the service?
20.
20.
She did her 20 and retired. And then she went to work for the Senate Intelligence Committee while I was still serving out my last couple of years on active duty. And she had a great career there as well. I mean, still contributing. I always like to brag to my friends that my wife has drafted legislation that is now U.S. law. How many people can say that? Yeah.
Oh.
And her, her knowledge of the Balkans came in very handy. We were talking earlier about my second book about hunting down war criminals in Bosnia. This is the one tour that was not Middle East related. I was back at Defense Intelligence Agency. We were developing a counterterrorism capability in the wake of the Khobar Towers bombing. We were tasked to start developing sources that would give us force protection capability, not just foreign intelligence. We need to find out what these people are trying to do to us while we're in their country. So I was working that, and I got a strange phone call from the general that runs attachés and operations. And he said, "You're going to Bosnia. We have a joint CIA-DIA team, and we're going to hunt down these war criminals." And I'm thinking, Bosnia, I'm trying to figure what part of the Middle East that is. And I had to go look on a map, and I called Emily. I said, "Hey, where's Bosnia? Tell me, give me a quick briefing." And she said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going there." And surprisingly, but it was, and I wrote a small book. It's a short ebook, and about doing that. It was fascinating, but it was the only time I ever operated outside the Middle East, and it's one of the very few times I ever had to operate in a country in which I did not speak the language. Very different situation.
So did you have to have an interpreter?
I did. I did. Well, we had several Air Force officers who could speak Serbo-Croatian, but I didn't want to bother one of them because they had real operational duties. I just needed someone to be with me, so when I needed to do something, I didn't have to take them off an operation. So we found a young woman that worked for DIA, and she was a Russian linguist. She had a degree in Russian. And Defense Language Institute, who runs all the language training for the military, did a great thing. They said, "Well, we don't have enough people that speak Serbo-Croatian, so we're going to find people that speak these other Slavic languages and send them to a short course, and like a familiarization course." And of course, it was nicknamed Turbo Serbo, and it was quite effective. She worked great. Of course, she was young, blonde. Serbians loved her. So.
That's probably what drew you to her.
Yeah, of course. No.
No?
Meritocracy. I'm big on meritocracy. And I have a bridge over here. So.
Is she in the next room listening to you?
No, I think she's in the other room.
Well, so I'm going to change gears just a little bit because I know that you had a great career, very often sought out by CNN, MSNBC, a lot of the news organizations and all. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But when you're not doing that, what does Rick and Emily enjoy doing?
Well, I fell into another gig. We had gone on a river cruise in Europe. We were going back to Romania, where she grew up, and on this river cruise, we met a woman who had a company that provides speakers to cruise lines, and they said, "You guys, both of you, would be great speakers on cruise ships." And we had never heard of this. And she said, "Well, let's talk." And so we started doing these cruises. We've done 11 now.
Wow.
Where you go on a cruise, and they give you they comp the cruise basically, and you give 4 or 5 lectures on all the sea days. If you've ever been on a cruise, they have sea days. That's when the speakers speak. We go to work.
That's right.
And fascinating. So we get to take a lot of cruises, and of course, COVID put the dent in that, but that's coming back. So we get to go on a lot of cruises. And I still keep my hand in Middle East. I write occasionally, not as much as I used to. when I was really employed by MSNBC as a contractor and CNN as a contractor, I had to be current. So I kept myself current on the Middle East and all that. I'm trying to be a little bit more retired now, but it's kind of hard because there's so much going on in that area.
Well, and of course, if you're going to be going on the cruise ships and you're going to be doing lectures, you have to be current.
You have to stay current. Yeah, so I'm looking at my bookmark list over here. I watch a lot of Arabic television to stay current because I think that perspective is a lot different. I'll give you an example. A lot of friends will say, "Oh, we watch Al Jazeera English, and so we know what they think." I said, "No, Al Jazeera English is not a translation of Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera English is a separate network, different editorial staff. If you watch Al Jazeera in English, you come away with a much different interpretation of the news, not always favorable to the West."
That's interesting because I know nothing of the Arabic language, but I follow through the Muslim community where I live a lot of the things that are going on, and I assumed that Al Jazeera was really the voice of what's going on. But you're saying that it's a little different in the English interpretation than it is in the Arabic interpretation.
Oh yeah, much different. The Arabic language version of Al Jazeera is much more strident, anti-West, anti-U.S., and certainly anti-Israel. So and they support Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Taliban, that sort of thing. So it's a totally different thing. But I feel it's important that I watch that to get that perspective. Right. And of course, when I give any kind of a presentation, and I don't do much of that anymore. COVID put me out of business. I used to have a pretty good business doing lectures and presentations, but no, everybody wants to do Zoom now.
Well, but as you said, the cruise industry is really rebounding now.
Yes, it is.
By leaps and bounds. More and more ships every year are being launched. And as you said, if you go on at least, say, a 7-day cruise, out of the 7-day cruise, you're probably going to spend at least 3 days at sea. And there's always things to do on the ship. And for those that are so inclined, book reviews and lectures and hands-on programs and everything are paramount. And when you and Emily go, are you both doing the same thing? Are you both lecturing, or is it
no? Because what I do is they bring me on. They contract with me, and we just did 2 back-to-back Alaska cruises, 7 days each. So we were on for 14 days. And during those 14 days, I gave 8 presentations. It was 4 presentations given twice. Wow, which is not bad. But I make her come up and help me with 2 of them. I talk about the intelligence community. That's very well received. So I get up there and she tells some story from her time on the Hill, on Capitol Hill. She has a different perspective of the intelligence community. So that gives people and most of the audience is American on these cruises. So they're very tuned into that. I talk about the war criminals in Bosnia. And then I talk about how the Middle East came to be. And so I have these kind of standard lectures that I do. But the Alaska cruise, so it was 2 7-day cruises. So 4 lectures, which is a bit much. Normally I would have given 3. But for some reason, they asked me to do 2 on one day. Wow, very tiring.
Yeah. Well, and I know that Emily, with her work with Adopt a Village in Guatemala, she could speak, volumes on that also.
Yeah. We both put a lot of time and effort into that. I'm their webmaster, social media guru, and mail. What do they call it? The mailing list thing. But it's mostly mechanical stuff. I let them, leave all the policy stuff up to them. But it's a really good cause, and she's really committed to it. So I try and support that.
What is there a particular cruise line that you usually sail with?
Well, we were very partial to Crystal cruises. In fact, almost all of our cruises were on Crystal, and of course, then they went out of business. So they say they're coming back. They're supposed to start cruising this year. So I hope to be able to speak on Crystal again because they were fabulous. They treated the speakers well. I have several cruises coming up with Silver Sea, also an ultra luxury line. We like that very well. So we've got a couple of cruises with them this year.
I want to take notes because my wife and I would love to go on an Alaskan cruise. And of course, I know that you and Emily are also very, very much involved with Rotary International. And we both, actually, the reason that we found you is through a childhood friend of mine, Bill Greil.
Bill.
We grew up in the same neighborhood back in Indiana for a while, and he introduced me to you and your lovely wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, when we go on our cruise to Alaska, we're going to head out there a couple of days early so we can connect with all of you guys.
Well, come on out and see us. Yeah.
Maybe we'll get on a cruise that you're speaking on. That would be wonderful.
I've told them, since we live in the Pacific Northwest, I can be on the ship in a day. I mean, I can just drive up to Vancouver. That's where they leave from. I said, I can just drive to Vancouver in, 11 hours and we'd be happy to do another cruise. And they said, well, if because we like Alaska.
So it's a great frontier to discover.
And you meet a lot of really interesting people on these cruises that you wouldn't imagine. On the last cruise, they asked me to talk about Ukraine and the future of NATO. So I put together a presentation, and I was talking about the expansion of NATO with Sweden and Finland wanting to join. And I said, I could talk a little bit about Sweden because I've been there. And I gave my thoughts on that. And I said, Finland, I'm not so sure of because I just don't know anything about it. But I think they're lending more toward neutrality than even Sweden. And at the end of the lecture, a very nice gentleman came up to me and said, I'm the U.S. ambassador to Finland. He said, you got it wrong. I said, great, sit down, let's talk.
Yes.
So when I give this again, I can give you the value of your expertise. So,
like we said earlier about having all that up to date information, and all going forward.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Ukraine, and so because of your involvement in the intelligence agencies and through the service and beyond, what is your opinion of what's going on there? How we are involved, because we are not involved with boots on the ground as we have in previous wars. What's your assessment of what's going on over there?
Well, okay, I will agree with you that officially we're not boots on the ground, but I have to believe that there are people over there, either the special operations guys or the agency would be there, and I don't have a problem with that. I think most of us from the intelligence community, and most of us, and you as well, are Cold War veterans. We remember the Cold War, remember the 10-foot tall Russians, the invincible Russian army, the 40,000 tanks. They're going to come rushing through the Fulda Gap into Germany. Right. And look at them. I mean, they are being held at bay by Ukraine. It was amazing to me that the Russians, with their much vaunted Air Force and their new class of weapons, have not been able to establish air superiority over Ukraine. I mean, that's the first thing we do, is dominate the sky. They haven't been able to do that in a year. So you have to wonder what happened to the Russian army, to the Soviet army. It's the shadow of its former self. So I'm surprised. I was initially concerned. I thought, oh, the Russians, they're just going to roll over. They're going to roll to Kiev and it's over. And I have to admit, surprised. Of course, I'm not a Ukrainian specialist, but I mean, you can look at the numbers. So my take is that because of NATO getting their act together, and I'll credit the previous administration and this administration for holding NATO's feet to the fire and making them live up to their commitments. NATO is now a potent force that's relevant. And we're pouring, of course, the United States, we're pouring billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine. And I hope that it leads to some good. I'm just worried that it's going to just go on and on. We're going to have a long stalemate, and it's just going to go. And I hope that someone in Washington has given Vladimir Putin an off-ramp, where he has a face-saving way of getting out of this, because we do not need to get into an escalating confrontation in Europe, because it will not end well for any of us.
Well, when we went into Vietnam, we never thought that would last for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we never thought that was going to last 10 years, and it went beyond that.
We're really good at getting in. We're not real good at getting out. And that's one thing I have to hold my hat off to General Schwarzkopf and General Powell. The first words they came up with were, what's the mission and what's the exit strategy? What do you want us to do? Because when we're done, we want to be out of there. And that's what we did. And we need to remember that when we get involved in these seemingly endless wars.
Well, and also, I think you'll agree too, when you go back to World War I, World War II, Korea, there was a dividing line between the good guys and the bad guys. In today's wars, there's really no battlefield. It's everybody everywhere. So it's difficult to know the terrain and to know, and things change in a moment's notice.
Because we're generally not fighting governments anymore. We're fighting groups, or we're fighting ideologies. And it's hard to tell the good guys from the bad guys, because a lot of times you can classify all of these as civil wars, which we should really stay out of if we can. But another thing too, when you look at World War I, World War II, and even Korea to some extent, you didn't have CNN and MSNBC and Fox broadcasting the war live to your living room. I think the first one was really Vietnam really broke that cycle, where you started seeing people like Dan Rather out there on the front line, beaming this into your living room on the 5 o'clock news. And war became the horrendous aspects of war became visible to the American people. I mean, if you look at what happened in World War II, rolling across Belgium, and the army would come up against, there's a sniper in that building, level the building and roll on. Can't do that today. You've got too much scrutiny, and you want to talk about the rules to fight war by. And, my own opinion, wars on how to kill each other. Yeah, we got to come up with some better way.
Is it fair to say that today, you mentioned the media, because the reporting is so instantaneous? This is letting us at home know what's going on, but gosh, the bad guys are watching that news coverage also.
Yeah, there's that fine line between operational security and keeping your public informed. And it was Schwarzkopf. General Schwarzkopf was very concerned about this. So he tended to keep the press bottled up in Riyadh, and he would brief them every day, but he didn't want them out on the front lines. And when he said, let them go, that's when we had that problem with a CNN reporter getting captured up on the Kuwaiti border. And, I remember that for sure, because I was working with the Saudis, the Saudi intelligence service, and they came to me one day and they said, hey, see if this makes sense to you. And I looked at it, and it was a handwritten fax in Arabic. Arabic's hard enough to read, let alone with, handwritten fax, all the dots moving. And I said, this Iraqi prisoner, when he was asked, do you know anything about American prisoners of war? He said, yes, I captured one. And I said, well, and there was no follow-up, because they were told to ask the question, but they weren't told to, ask the follow-up questions. I said, can you find this guy? And he said, yeah. I said, can you take me to him? He said, yeah, let's go. So I said, come on. So I went up to the POW camp, and I met with this young Iraqi sergeant. I said, you said you know about American POWs? He said, yes. I said, how do you know he's American? And, clever me, I didn't think. He says, well, he showed me his passport. I said, that's a good indication. Good. He said, and he was wearing American cowboy pants, jeans. And but they had snagged a CNN journalist, and the problem was he was Jewish, and we were trying to keep that fact under wraps, unsuccessfully, because the media just went nuts with it.
There are fascinating stories. Check the website, folks. Francona.com, Francona.net, and I'll read about it. You can send any questions you might have. And gosh, if those ships get back on the water going to Alaska and all, folks, you may want to sign up for one of those cruises so that you can sit and have some lectures with Rick Francona. I'm going to throw one more real quick question at you before we take off. Who is Terry Francona?
Terry Francona is my first cousin. My father and Terry's father are brothers. You know, Terry's father was Tito, and professional baseball player, and of course he was. So yep. My uncle Tito is Terry's father.
Yeah. I know the name because I've been following Cleveland baseball for a long time, and he's the manager of the Cleveland Guardians now.
Yeah, I know.
I still like to call them the Indians. Rick, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be with me and sharing your absolutely incredible career. And I honestly, I say this in all honesty, I really look forward to being in one of your lectures one of these days. And if I don't make it to one of your lectures, then we're going to have to sit down and have a meal sometime when we make it out to Oregon.
Yeah, come on out. We'll get together with Bill. We'll have a great time.
Excellent. My love to Emily. Tell her I said hello also. And thanks again for being a part of Someone You Should Know. I always leave my show by saying, be yourself, because everyone else is taken. And Rick Francona is one of those people that's already taken. So come back and see us again next week. And thanks again for being a part of Someone You Should Know.